Cinderella. Once upon a time, there lived a kind and gentle girl named Cinderella. But she spent her days in hardship, constantly mistreated by her stepmother and two stepsisters. One day, as if cleaning the living room wasn't enough, one of the stepsisters ordered Cinderella to clean her own room as well. Cinderella, as always, quietly carried out all the tasks without complaint. Cinderella gazed sadly out the window at the magnificent castle in the distance. In her eyes, a small, heartfelt wish quietly shimmered. Someday, she hoped to dance at the palace ball in a beautiful gown, a wish she quietly whispered to herself, deep within her heart. Then, one day, a splendid invitation from the palace arrived at Cinderella's home. The stepmother, her eyes sparkling, entered the house with the invitation in hand, and excitedly delivered the news that the prince had invited all the women in the village to the ball to find his bride. The stepsisters, determined to win the prince's heart, filled the entire house with noise and commotion. Her stepmother, noticing Cinderella quietly watching from behind, firmly told her, "You have no dress to wear, so stay home and finish the cleaning." Cinderella also wanted to go to the ball, but seeing her shabby appearance, she had no choice but to quietly suppress her longing heart. And so, only the stepmother and stepsisters left for the ball. Cinderella was left alone in her room, quietly shedding tears in solitude. Then, a bright light sparkled before Cinderella's eyes, and a fairy with a gentle smile appeared. Surprised, Cinderella widened her eyes and carefully asked the fairy how she had appeared in that place. Then, the fairy introduced herself as Cinderella's fairy godmother who had come to help her, and she said that she would help Cinderella go to the ball that very night. Cinderella asked the fairy again, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. She was worried, wondering how she could possibly attend the ball without a beautiful dress or a carriage. The fairy godmother smiled warmly and promised to help her attend the ball in the most beautiful way possible. And then, as the fairy godmother waved her wand, sparkling lights began to swirl around Cinderella. Then, her old and tattered clothes transformed into a dazzling sky blue gown. On her feet appeared a pair of sparkling glass slippers. Cinderella was so surprised by her transformed appearance that she was left speechless. She couldn't help but admire her own beauty, seeing herself like that for the very first time. The fairy godmother warned Cinderella that everything would return to its original state after midnight, and urged her to come back before the clock struck 12. Cinderella's heart swelled with joy and excitement at the thought of going to the royal ball. Seeing Cinderella so overjoyed, the fairy godmother smiled warmly and said she would also create a splendid carriage for her. And when the fairy godmother waved her wand toward a pumpkin, some mice, and a lizard, the pumpkin turned into a golden carriage, the mice into graceful white horses, and the lizard into a splendid coachman. With sparkling eyes, Cinderella sincerely thanked the fairy godmother and then took her first step toward the royal ball. Inside the castle, the royal ball was already in full swing. People dressed in splendid gowns were dancing, and the ballroom was filled with laughter and joy. However, the prince wandered quietly around the ballroom, wearing a rather gloomy expression for some unknown reason. His heart felt inexplicably empty. It was at that very moment the grand doors of the castle began to open, slowly and quietly. In an instant, everyone's eyes turned toward the entrance, each person wondering who the mysterious girl could be. They murmured that they had never seen such a beautiful young woman before. Just then, the prince, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stood up and walked briskly towards Cinderella. The prince, with a gentle smile, reached out his hand and invited Cinderella to dance with him. Cinderella, her face lit up with joy, gently took the prince's hand, and the two began to dance gracefully in the center of the ballroom to the rhythm of the music. The two began to dance in the center of the ballroom, moving in perfect harmony with the music. In that moment, it felt just like a dream. Cinderella spent the most joyful and dazzling time of her life. But time passed all too quickly, and the grand clock inside the castle began to chime midnight. Cinderella was startled and quickly let go of the prince's hand. Cinderella, with a look of panic on her face, hurriedly began running toward the exit of the palace. Fearing that the magic would soon wear off, her steps grew quicker and more frantic. The prince, startled and confused, quickly ran outside the palace, chasing after her. Cinderella quietly bid farewell to the prince as she climbed into the golden carriage and disappeared into the night. In her haste to leave the castle, Cinderella didn't realize she had lost one of her glass slippers on the grand staircase. The prince found the glass slipper left behind on the staircase and quietly made a vow to himself. He vowed to find the owner of this shoe no matter what, and that when they met again, he would never let her go. The next morning, the prince began visiting every corner of the village himself in search of Cinderella. He went around the village to find the owner of the glass slipper, but no one seemed to be the right fit. At last, he arrived at the house where Cinderella lived. The prince quietly took out the glass slipper and gently asked if anyone in the house would like to try it on. Upon hearing this, Cinderella's stepsister confidently tried to slip her foot into the shoe. But no matter how hard she tried, it simply wouldn't fit. The prince, looking disappointed, turned his head and asked if there was anyone else who could try on the shoe. Another stepsister nearby also tried on the shoe. But when it didn't fit, the prince, his hopes fading, turned away in disappointment as if ready to leave. At that moment, Cinderella, who had been quietly standing in a corner, finally stepped forward. The prince gently asked Cinderella if she would try on the glass slipper as well. Cinderella quietly nodded, and the prince gently slipped the glass slipper onto her foot. Then, something amazing happened. The glass slipper fit her perfectly, as if it had been made just for her. The prince's eyes sparkled with joy and relief, and he smiled as if he had finally reunited with his destined one after a long wait. The prince warmly took Cinderella's hand in his and sincerely proposed to her. Cinderella's eyes sparkled as she nodded in heartfelt acceptance. And so, Cinderella and the prince were married in a grand ceremony filled with everyone's blessings, and they lived happily ever after.